Let me tell you something, and I need you to really hear this. I wasted decades of my life trying to be the kind of person other people would accept, not love, not respect, just accept. And if you think that sounds dramatic, wait until I tell you what it cost me. Because one day, and I remember this moment like it's burned into my brain, I was sitting in my car, engine off, hands shaking, and I realized I didn't even know who I was anymore. And the scary part, nobody had taken that from me. I gave it away. If you stay with me for the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you the psychological truth I wish someone had forced me to understand years ago, because it would have saved me pain, humiliation, and years of quiet self-betrayal. Here's what nobody tells you about growing up. You don't just learn skills. You learn survival strategies. How to speak so people don't reject you. How to behave so you're not too much. How to shrink politely, and the world rewards that. Teachers like you. Friends tolerate you. Partners keep you around. But inside, you're negotiating your identity every single day. And you don't even realize it's happening. Psychology calls this external validation dependency. Simple language, you start outsourcing your worth. And once that happens, your emotions are no longer yours. Someone ignores you, you spiral. Someone criticizes you, you collapse. Someone leaves, you feel erased. That's not weakness. That's conditioning. And I lived inside that prison longer than I want to admit. I want to tell you something I didn't plan on admitting out loud, because for a long time, even saying it to myself felt like failure. There was a stretch of my life, years, not months, where everything looked fine. From the outside, I was functioning. I had the job, the social circle, the routine that says, she's doing okay. And I learned very early how to perform okay convincingly. But inside, there was this quiet exhaustion I couldn't explain. Not the kind that sleep fixes. The kind that comes from constantly managing how you're perceived. I didn't realize it back then, but I was living almost entirely through other people's reactions to me. My mood depended on texts getting answered. My confidence depended on whether someone approved of a decision. My sense of worth rose and fell on the smallest social cues. And the scary part? I thought that was normal. I told myself, this is just adulthood. Everyone feels this way. But there was one moment, and it's strange how life compresses years of denial into a single instant that forced me to actually see what I was doing to myself. I remember sitting in my car after work. Nothing dramatic had happened. No fight, no crisis. Just silence. The engine was off. The parking lot was almost empty. And I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. And I didn't recognize the person looking back. Not physically, emotionally. I had this sudden, piercing thought. When was the last time I made a decision that was actually for me? Not to avoid disappointing someone. Not to maintain an image. Not to keep the peace. For me. And I couldn't answer. That realization didn't come with tears or panic. It was quieter than that. Almost clinical. Like my brain was presenting evidence in a courtroom I didn't want to attend. Exhibit A. The job I stayed in because it sounded impressive. Exhibit B. The relationship I kept negotiating instead of questioning. Exhibit C. The friendships where I was agreeable to the point of invisibility. I had built a life optimized for acceptance, not authenticity. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The uncomfortable truth hit next. I wasn't afraid of losing people. I was afraid of losing the version of myself they approved of, because I didn't know who existed underneath that. Psychologically, this is what happens when your identity becomes externally anchored. Your brain learns that safety equals approval, so it starts filtering every decision through one question. Will this keep me accepted? Not, is this aligned with who I am? That difference sounds small, but it changes the entire trajectory of your life. And I had been running on the wrong question for years. The breaking point didn't come as some cinematic meltdown. It came as a slow, undeniable awareness that I was tired of negotiating my personality in every room I entered. I noticed it in little things, laughing at jokes I didn't find funny, apologizing when I hadn't done anything wrong, shrinking opinions to avoid tension. Each moment felt harmless on its own. Together, they formed a pattern. I was abandoning myself in small installments. And abandonment, even self-inflicted, has consequences. I started feeling disconnected from my own reactions. I'd say yes when I meant no, then sit alone replaying the moment, wondering why I couldn't just be honest. That internal friction builds. It creates this low-grade resentment, not toward other people, but toward yourself. That's a heavy thing to carry. The shift began the day I experimented with something radical for me at the time. I paused before responding. That's it. Someone asked me to commit to something I didn't want to do. My reflex was to say yes, but instead, I let the silence exist for 2 seconds and asked myself, what do I actually want here? The answer surprised me because it was so clear. I said no, and I braced for impact, disappointment, rejection, conflict. None of it came. The world didn't collapse. The relationship didn't end. The person simply said, okay. That tiny moment rewired something fundamental. It showed me how much fear had been imaginary, a prediction, not reality. From there, I started running small experiments in honesty, expressing a preference, admitting uncertainty, disagreeing respectfully. Each time, my nervous system expected catastrophe, and each time, it survived. What changed wasn't the world. It was my interpretation of what disagreement or disapproval meant. Instead of reading it as danger, I began seeing it as information. That's when confidence started to feel different than I'd imagined. It wasn't loud or dominant. It didn't look like fearlessness. It felt like alignment, like my words and internal state were finally in the same room. And once you experience that alignment, even briefly, you realize how exhausting it is to live without it. I won't pretend the transformation was instant or linear. There were setbacks, moments where old habits resurfaced, where I defaulted to pleasing because it was familiar. But now I could see the pattern while it was happening, and awareness gives you choice. That's the real power. Today, when I feel that old pull to manage perceptions, I ask a different question. Am I acting from fear or from truth? That pause is everything, because over time, choosing truth, even imperfectly, builds a relationship with yourself that approval never could. And when that internal relationship stabilizes, other people's reactions stop feeling like verdicts on your worth. They're just responses. Information, not identity. If there's one thing I wish someone had told me earlier, it's this. You don't lose yourself all at once. You lose yourself in quiet compromises that feel reasonable in the moment. And you rebuild yourself the same way, through small, deliberate acts of honesty that feel terrifying until they become natural. That's the journey I'm still on, not toward perfection, but toward a life that actually feels like it belongs to me. And the peace that comes with that, it's quieter than approval, but infinitely stronger. Here's the part one wish someone had explained to me plainly, without slogans, without motivational fluff, just the mechanics of what was actually happening inside my head. Because for years, I thought my emotions were reactions to reality. Something bad happens, I feel bad. Someone rejects me, I feel worthless. A plan falls apart, I panic. It all felt automatic, obvious, inevitable. But what I eventually learned, and this is the psychological truth most people never slow down enough to see, is that your brain is not reacting to reality itself. It's reacting to the meaning it assigns to reality, and that assignment happens so fast you mistake it for truth. Think about how quickly your mind fills in blanks. Someone reads your message and doesn't reply. Within seconds, your brain isn't sitting there neutrally waiting. It's building a story. They're ignoring me. I said something wrong. They don't respect me. Notice what just happened. Nothing objectively harmful occurred. There's an unanswered message. That's the event. Everything else is interpretation layered on top. And your nervous system doesn't distinguish between fact and interpretation very well. Once your brain generates a story, your body reacts as if that story is reality. Heart rate changes. Muscles tense. Mood shifts. This isn't weakness. It's how predictive brains work. Your mind is constantly trying to answer one question. What does this mean for me? Not in words, in survival terms. Am I safe? Am I valued? Am I included? Am I threatened? Every social interaction, every setback, every ambiguous moment runs through that filter. The problem isn't that your brain assigns meaning. That's necessary. The problem is that most of those meanings are guesses shaped by past experiences, not present facts. And once a guess is made, your brain commits to it hard. Psychologists call this cognitive appraisal, the interpretation that determines emotional response. Two people can experience the exact same situation and walk away with completely different emotional outcomes because their appraisals differ. One sees failure. Another sees feedback. One sees rejection. Another sees incompatibility. Same event. Different nervous system reaction. When I first understood this, it was unsettling because it meant a lot of my suffering wasn't coming directly from the world. It was coming from the stories I was repeating about the world. And repetition is powerful. The brain is wired for efficiency. If a certain interpretation shows up enough times, your mind treats it as a default pattern. It becomes the lens, not the thought. You stop noticing that you're interpreting. It feels like you're simply seeing reality clearly. That's how beliefs form. If your internal narrative repeatedly says, "I'm not enough," your brain starts scanning for evidence to confirm it. Not because it wants you to suffer, but because the brain prioritizes consistency. Predictability feels safer than uncertainty, so it highlights every awkward interaction, every criticism, every moment of hesitation, and quietly ignores evidence that contradicts the story. This is called confirmation bias, and it's incredibly persuasive. It can make a distorted belief feel airtight. What makes this cycle difficult is that your emotional response reinforces the narrative. You feel anxious or ashamed, and your brain says, "See, this situation is dangerous." The emotion becomes proof, even though the emotion was generated by the interpretation in the first place. It's a closed loop. Interpretation, emotion, reinforced belief, stronger interpretation. And you can live inside that loop for years without realizing you're participating in it. The turning point is recognizing a simple but profound distinction. An event is not the same thing as the story about the event. That sounds obvious when stated calmly, but in real time it feels anything but obvious. When emotions spike, the story feels inseparable from reality. Someone cancels plans. Event, plans changed. Story, I'm not important. Your body reacts to the story, not the calendar update. Once you see this pattern, something shifts. You start noticing the microsecond where interpretation happens. It's subtle, a flicker of meaning layered onto a neutral event. And in that flicker is choice. Not the choice to suppress emotion or pretend you don't care. Real psychological regulation isn't denial. It's curiosity. Instead of immediately believing the first story your brain generates, you ask, what else could this mean? That question alone interrupts the loop. It signals to your nervous system that the interpretation is not settled fact. It's a hypothesis. And hypotheses can be revised. Maybe they are busy. Maybe I misread the tone. Maybe this has nothing to do with my worth. You're not forcing positivity. You're expanding the frame. Over time, this practice changes how your brain predicts outcomes. The nervous system learns that ambiguity is not automatically danger. Emotional spikes become information instead of commands. This is where psychological flexibility develops. The ability to experience thoughts and feelings without being governed by them. You still feel disappointment. You still notice rejection. But the emotional charge doesn't hijack your identity. It becomes data you can respond to, not a verdict you must obey. And that distinction is freedom. Because when you stop treating every interpretation as truth, you create space between stimulus and response. In that space, Your behavior becomes intentional rather than reactive. You choose how to act instead of being pushed by the loudest narrative in your head. The long-term effect is subtle but transformative. Relationships feel less fragile because they are no longer carrying the weight of your identity. Setbacks become feedback loops instead of character judgments. Social friction becomes navigable rather than catastrophic. Most importantly, your sense of self stops swinging wildly with every external cue. You realize something grounding. Your thoughts are events happening in your mind, not commandments carved into reality. That doesn't eliminate emotion. It recalibrates your relationship with it. And once you internalize that, truly internalize it, you stop fighting your brain and start working with it. You see interpretations as tools, not truths. You become less interested in being right about your fears and more interested in understanding them. That shift doesn't make life perfect, but it makes it navigable. And that's the psychological truth I wish I had learned earlier. You don't experience the world directly. You experience your mind's model of the world. Change how you relate to that model, and your emotional reality changes with it. Not because life becomes easier, but because you stop mistaking every story for fact. And that's where real stability begins. I lived most of my life like that. Caught in the loops my brain kept spinning for me. Every misread glance, every delayed reply, every small mistake became proof of my own shortcomings. I carried invisible weight, thinking it was reality, letting it shape every decision, every conversation, every tiny moment of joy. It wasn't until I started noticing that flicker, that microsecond where my mind was building a story, that things began to shift. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, I realized I could step back, even just a little, and ask, what else could this mean? I started experimenting. I reminded myself that interpretations were not facts, that my thoughts were like clouds passing over the sky, temporary, changeable, sometimes stormy, sometimes clay. I began responding to events rather than reacting to the stories I told myself. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. People still canceled plans. Projects still failed. Criticism still stung. But I felt different. Lighter. I could notice disappointment without letting it define me. I could feel fear without letting it dictate my choices. I could sit with uncertainty without collapsing under it. I started enjoying moments I would have otherwise missed. The quiet conversations, the ordinary successes, the simple laughter. Relationships felt less fragile because I wasn't projecting my inner stories onto everyone around me. Work felt less draining because I wasn't constantly battling imagined judgments. I realized that freedom isn't about eliminating emotion. It's about choosing how you relate to it. It's about recognizing that your mind's stories are just stories. They are not commands carved in stone. They are not the measure of your worth. They are tools, raw material to work with, not cages to live inside. I changed the way I lived my life. I stopped letting every small signal hijack my peace. I stopped treating my internal narratives as reality. I became curious instead of reactive. I started treating my thoughts as data to guide me, not verdicts to trap me. And with that change, life became richer. I noticed the colors more. I laughed more easily. I worried less. I started seeing people as people, not as mirrors reflecting my fears. I started taking risks, making mistakes, failing, and learning, without carrying unnecessary shame or self-judgment. I don't want you to live the way I did for decades, trapped by loops that felt like reality. You can start noticing the stories your mind tells you, questioning them, and creating space to respond intentionally. You can enjoy your life while still feeling. You can experience emotion without letting it own you. This is the simplest, hardest, and most rewarding lesson I learned. The world you think you're reacting to isn't real. It's your mind's model of the world. Change how you relate to that model, and your experience of life changes too. Not instantly, not perfectly, but profoundly. I lived most of my life believing my thoughts were reality. I lost time, energy, and moments that now feel precious. But once I saw the pattern, I reclaimed my life. You can do the same. Notice the stories. Question them. Choose your response. Enjoy the ride, even when it's messy. If this story resonated with you, and you want to explore more insights like this, Make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Your attention is how I keep sharing these lessons, and together we can navigate life more consciously, more intentionally, and more fully.